pick up on one of the other issues that's mentioned. It was interesting, that chap in the market, wasn't it, talking about UKIP. They're a threat to both your parties. Mark Reckless, they've had an increasing share of the vote in Hastings every election since 2001. Are you wary of them and what they'll do at the next election?
I mean, I think my party, the Conservatives, we need to offer people, I think, a clear in-out referendum. So, you know, the electorate as a whole gets to decide.
On membership of the European Union?
Yeah, do we want to stay part of this European Union, or do we again want to be an independent country trading with Europe, governing ourselves?
If you offer that, is that bloke in the market going to vote for you, do you think? Is that enough?
I think there's a much better chance that he would. But I think there's other issues we have to address as well, particularly immigration, which was a big issue at the doorstep at the last election in Kent. And there we now are actually seeing numbers coming down, and we've brought in a lot of measures to restrict visas and actually really to make a difference in that area now.
Well, if the Tories want to hold on to seats in the South East, their leader could be crucial. While the party languishes behind Labour in the polls, the Prime Minister is usually ahead of Ed Miliband in leadership surveys. David Cameron has been talking to our political editor Louise Stewart. She began by asking him why commuters in the South East are facing rises in rail fares well above the rate of inflation.
Well, I'm not satisfied with what's happening on rail fares. We inherited a system from the last government when they were kept going up by more than inflation. We need to do two things effectively. First is we've got to cut costs and make our railways more efficient and effective. That's why we held the McNulty review, and I'm determined to make sure we drive that through and try to keep costs down. But obviously we've got to look at the decisions we make each year about rail fares and make sure we demonstrate that we're on the side of people who work hard, who want to get to work, who want to get on and help their families, and we'll be doing that.
But in the South East, Tory MPs point out they've already had to pay more for investment in HS1. They're continuing to pay more than the level of inflation. Season tickets costing a fortune. You need to do something about that, don't you?
Well, the South East economy is vitally important for the future of our country. I accept that railways have been too expensive. We need to work out why it is that our railways are so expensive. That's what the McNulty review is about. We're going to bear down on costs, and I think in that way we can help commuters. But let's be clear, you know, we want to expand our rail network. We're putting massive investment into our rail network. We're electrifying more of our rail network. That money can only come from one of two places. It can come from taxpayers or it can come from rail users. So we do have to ask rail users to contribute to the massive investment going into our railways.
Rail users will be very concerned at the disarray at the Department of Transport at the moment. Thames Link is now on pause, its franchise. What's going on there? It's in disarray.
Well, first of all, let me reassure everyone who uses our railways that they will continue to run as they are today. But clearly this is very disappointing what's happened. I'm extremely angry about how this was allowed to happen. Clearly there has been a fault in the department. We need to get to the bottom of that, and that's why a review will be carried out. And if mistakes have been made, people will quite rightly pay the price for that. But be in no doubt that the railways will continue to run. We'll sort this problem out.
It could cost £300 million to the taxpayer, though. Does that mean fares are going to go up again?
Well, we don't know what this is going to cost. Clearly there will be costs because of the legal challenge and because of having to pay some of the costs that are involved in this failed franchise. There will be costs. I totally accept that. We have to get to the bottom of how this went wrong. Clearly there were mistakes. I think a lot of them technical errors in the department. I am personally disappointed by that because I asked for the Cabinet Secretary to look into this whole area and make sure that decisions had been made in the right way. But it does seem some serious technical errors were made. We will get to the bottom of those and we'll make sure this doesn't happen
You
again.
yourself are being accused of dither, though, because the Department of Transport, again, you've kicked the aviation review into the long grass. It's not going to report back till after the next election.
No, not at all. What we said very clearly at the last election is that we wouldn't build a third runway at Heathrow. We're keeping that promise, but I think it's very important for the long-term future of our economy that we maintain our hub status as a country so that we are connected to all the fastest growing economies of the world. This is a very big decision for Britain. The decision we make we'll have to live with for decades to come. So it's right to take the time under the Sir Howard Davis's review to then decide what is the right answer. But let's not, while we do that, talk down the excellent airports that we have. Heathrow has more planes taking off and landing with just 2 runways than airports in the rest of the world do, sometimes with 5 or 6 runways.
All right, David Cameron, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
OK, Mark Reckless, complete contradiction in David Cameron's answer about rail fares. He says in one breath you've got to do what you can to bear down on prices. In the next breath he talks about the need to invest and that the rail user has to pick up the tab for that. It's another example of government equivocation. It's not in the least reassuring for the commuters in your constituency.
What we've got to really focus on is the cost of living, which I think is the single issue that worries people most. And rail fares are a really significant part of that, particularly for
So what
commuters.
should happen? Let's be really clear. Should the cost be picked up by the broader taxpayer if we're going to have improvements, or do we stop improving the railways?
Well, I think we should go back to having fares go up by just 1% above inflation, because South Eastern was used by the previous Labour government as a guinea pig for this inflation plus 3% every year. And last year, for the first time, thanks to lobbying from MPs such as myself, Tracy Crouch, Amber Rudd, particularly for Hastings, who now works with the Chancellor, we got RPI plus 1, and I really, we've got to carry on campaigning to get that and try and help people with the cost of living. Let's
just come back to this idea of Ed Miliband versus David Cameron as leaders of your respective parties. Ed Miliband was widely perceived as not as strong a leader by the public for quite a long time, and then he does a great speech at his party conference. He comes up with this killer line: incompetent, hopeless, out of touch, U-turning, pledge breaking, make it up as you go along, back of the envelope, miserable shower. He is not your secret weapon anymore, is he?
I think his presentation was much improved. I mean, I saw that speech and that line. It was well memorised, and he came over, I thought, much better in that speech. But the key issue really is what the Labour government did with borrowing and spending before. And I think until Ed Miliband owns up to the mistakes that Labour made and told us how they're going to be different, then I don't think people want to trust them again with the finances.
Maggie Jones, have you got the right leader now? Can he take David Cameron on?
I think he can, and it wasn't just about presentation, it was about content. His theme of One Nation is something that is appealing to all of the electorate, and it is the big dividing line between Labour and the Tories, because unfortunately David Cameron has squandered that image he had as being, we're all in this together, I'll provide a unified leadership. People now see him as elitist and divisive, in contrast to Ed, that does represent one nation for this country.
Thank you. We've talked a lot about national politics and political leaders, but in reality, a lot of the issues we care about most are decided at a local level. For instance, 3 words that stir up incredible emotion: live animal exports. An explosive trade which has been associated with major protests in Kent and Sussex. It's been back in the news since more than 40 sheep died as a result of 2 incidents at the port of Ramsgate. Thanet District Council took the opportunity to suspend live exports, but pressure is growing for a resumption. The National Farmers Union says they are a perfectly legal trade. Are you pleased that the trade has dried up, Maggie Jones?
I am, personally, yes. I think in a civilised nation we shouldn't be inflicting this sort of long journeys in cramped conditions on the animals that you've seen on the news programme.
Well, that's not about the channel crossing, though, is it? I mean, if that's your argument, then we shouldn't be transporting live animals around the country at all.
Well, my view is this. Most farmers I know care very, very deeply about the welfare of their animals, and they take enormous steps to make sure that they are well looked after and they have proper animal husbandry. Most of them wouldn't want their animals that they've looked after so well to take long and scary journeys of this nature. I just think that if it means that the UK goes it alone, personally I think they should do that, actually. We should set a standard.
Let's put that to Mark Reckless. The UK going it alone. The DEFRA website is very interesting. It says the government's often urged to ban live exports, and it says this: we would prefer to see meat exported rather than live animals, but the clear legal position is that it is a legitimate trade with the European community. It's legal. Why should the farmers be told they can't do it anymore?
Because, as Maggie says, this is an issue on which the UK should go our own way. People in this country care very strongly about animal welfare. I really don't see why animals should be exported halfway across Europe. And I think in this area we should reflect UK public opinion.
They're not exported halfway across Europe. They go across the Channel, and the farmers would like it to be from Dover, the shortest crossing. It's a very short journey. They travel further around the country in this country.
But some of them then go on and travel quite a long distance in Europe. I really think in most circumstances we can deal with these issues at home, and the fact that EU law says this should happen, I don't think that's sufficient. I think, as Maggie says, we should go our own way on this issue.
Baroness Jones, was it a huge relief to local politicians in and around Shoreham, close to where you are in Brighton, when the trade stopped there after those devastating protests?
Absolutely, and of course, if you remember, then they all business at the harbour stopped for many months, and I'm very pleased that the trade at Ramsgate has stopped now. Otherwise, you could have seen similar protests. But it's not just about the protests. At the heart of it, it's animal welfare, and that's what we have to defend.
Thank you both on that one very much. Now, our regular roundup of the political week in the South East. It's short and sweet. Here's Louise Stewart.
Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, launched his strongest attack yet on the lack of aviation policy in the South East.
No European country is being so blind and so complacent.
Back in the 70s, there wasn't such demand for airport capacity when holidaymakers flocked to places like Margate. But the Conservative MP for Rochester and Strood, Mark Reckless, warned it's a different type of visitor the town is now attracting. He says too many ex-prisoners are being released from Kent jails and moving to Thanet, pushing up the crime rate. The Labour leader Ed Miliband impressed delegates in Manchester with his conference speech. If that's not enough to win back voters in the South East, where they have no MPs, it was announced the Shadow Chancellor Ed Balls is adopting a marginal seat.
Look, it's vital that Labour wins in Dover and Deal. Right across the South East, we've got to show we're standing up for families having a hard time at the moment for the jobs that they need. And I'm going to back Claire all the way.
Mr Balls admits he hasn't taken his wife, the Shadow Home Secretary, on a date for a decade. Let's hope he is more successful in floating voters.
We'll get on to dating if we've time. Ed Balls there endorsing the Dover and Deal candidate Claire Hawkins. Maggie James, is that good news for her or bad news? Did she even get a say?
I'm sure it's a marriage, a mutually agreed marriage, and I'm sure that they'll do very well together.
Mark Reckless, the Balls-Cooper household and the lack of dates made you laugh out loud. Is that a feature of political life or just a reality for parents? When did you last go out on a date?
It was our anniversary last week, and we did manage to go out on a date, and I dread to think what my wife would have to say if we didn't go out on a date for a decade.
But yeah, it does seem a bit bleak. Does political life take its toll on social life, Maggie James?
Oh, it does, yes. It does, and we should have more of a work-life balance, and I would like all parties to embrace that principle with a little bit more enthusiasm. But yeah, it's hard. It's a hard life. It's a hard life for any MP.
Well,
and they don't get the credit for how hard they work.
It's been great having you both on. Thank you both very much indeed. Now.